In this lecture, we'll be dealing primarily with issues involved in chapter number 2 of Hollinson and issues involved in the activity that goes on before going international. Hollinson is one of many marketing theorists who talk about the concepts of proactive motives for internationalization and reactive motives for internationalization. Proactive motives, including managerial urge or tax benefits or economy of scales, are incentives to move internationally. Reactive motives, on the other hand, have to deal with attacks to the local markets which force companies to move overseas. Some of these can be competitive pressures or unsolicited foreign offers, or maybe a concept we will deal with significantly in this course, psychological distance. I work for a company called EF. I've worked there for the past 16 years. In Colombia, our most famous product is English Live. You see it on television most nights. But in addition to that, EF is an insurance company called Scandia. It has major holdings in Old Mutual, an insurance company in Colombia. Owns travel companies, education companies, universities. EF moved to Switzerland. It was originally from Sweden, but it moved to Switzerland. The primary reason why? The owners wanted to live in Switzerland. No other reason. There were tax benefits, but for the most part, the owners wanted to go skiing. So the corporate headquarters of EF now is in Zurich. As we see, this is a proactive motive. This is a motive that says there's an incentive to move internationally. Different companies have different motives. The Hollinson book says that internationalization can be inward or outward. In other words, inward internationalization is importing. That you're going to be a company in Colombia, but you need a supplier from another country. Thus, you're going to import goods, set up the infrastructure to import goods, and that will be inward internationalization. Outward internationalization is when you export goods to another country. So maybe you import raw materials and you export finished goods. This is an example of an internationalization network. One company in Colombia that does this is Studio FA, or Studio F. The holding company is called STX and includes two primary retail companies, Studio FA and Ella. Much of my research from Studio FA involves contacts who are designers or contacts who are suppliers. In addition, I've done significant research on the importing and exporting of this company using data from Dion. So what Studio FA tends to do is that they import cloth from China. Now, it's not always because it's the cheapest product. For example, let's take the product Chanel. Chanel is a thin cloth that's used either for high fashion or for environments that's really hot. They don't even make Chanel in Colombia, but they have no choice but to import it because it isn't made in Colombia. So it's not always that a company wants to get a cheaper price. It's sometimes the material isn't made in their own country. Regardless, Studio FA imports an enormous amount of fabric. Then they bring it to Cali, which is the center of Studio FA, and designers, who many of whom are from Zara, H&M, or Mango, create new fashions. Outward internationalization is done because Studio FA now exists in 10 countries, particularly it's strong in Mexico. Yet there's also proactive and reactive motives to Studio FA moving overseas. For example, a proactive motive is they're trying to find new foreign markets. A reactive motive is there's a lot of competition in Colombia. One big source of reaction that forced Studio FA to go overseas was the entry of Zara into the local market. In the early 2000s, Zara entered the Colombian market. What Zara offered the Colombia market, which did not offer the international market, was Zara offered an enormous amount of new selection. There was also fear of the free trade agreement, what you call TLC, what in the United States is called the Colombian Free Trade of the Americas. That created a fear that the Colombian market was going to be flooded with cheap American goods. Finally, there was a changing role of women, and the women were more likely to go into the office, more likely to work, and needed more clothing that was suited towards the office. Some of the proactive motives that encouraged extensive internationalization by Studio EFE included tax benefits from Grupo Tres. Mexico and Colombia have a free trade agreement, and Mexico is able to accept foreign goods without high tariffs. Thus, this became a market that Studio EFE wanted to export to. Another one is there was foreign market opportunity. As I said in the last slide, one thing that changed about Studio EFE was the changing role of women in society. More women were going to the office. At the same time this was happening in Colombia, this was also happening in Mexico. Thus, Studio EFE designed a line of clothing, which is called Studio EFE Line Gold. And the gold line is for women from 30 to 40. They say 30 to 40, but actually they mean 30 to 50. And this is women's office wear. What the designer of Studio EFE told me, a designer who is actually from Zara, said that what they wanted to do was create Zara clothing for women who were at the office, but create it with better materials and create it with higher quality sewing and craftsmanship, and thus it would last longer, give it better value, and also create a higher price point for the product. Remember, your value proposition can be low-cost goods, or it can be excellent goods that are made better. In this case, it was excellent goods that are made better. Finally, there was proactive goals because the company wanted to grow. There's also triggers, for example, perceptive management. In the case of Studio EFE, although it was a store that focused on women's fashion that was suited towards a very hot environment, the management saw that times were changing and they perceived that there were great opportunities. External triggers could be, for example, competing firms, in this case Zara, or the fact that in some cases you can get international financing. Another example of a company that went international because of proactive and reactive motives was Vestergaard Frandsen. This is a company from Denmark. While I was in Denmark, I had the great fortune of visiting with the head of sales for the company, who helped me out with this portion of the case study. Vestergaard was originally a company which produced fabrics which prevented bacteria from reaching the skins of doctors. As my contact at Vestergaard in Denmark told me, he said that originally what they were trying to make was uniforms, particularly for surgery or for medical personnel who would come in contact with blood. And thus they created fabric that had very small holes, yet was porous. Their original intent was to let perspiration out while blocking bacteria from coming in. This picture shows some of the clothes that would be similar to the material and uniforms that Vestergaard would make for surgical personnel. But because they were focused on medicine, they also saw other opportunities for their products, especially in international markets. And thus, we get to one of our core points in marketing, which can be applied to international marketing, the idea of STPD, segment, target, position differentiation. Their original segment was medicine. Their target was doctors, especially doctors or dentists who would come in contact with blood or bacteria. Their position was a fabric that could protect you. And finally, they differentiated themselves because they focused on medicine and bacteria, whereas a company like Gore focuses on water or aeronautics. However, Vestigard was able to extend their products in order to help people in Africa. Africa suffers from an enormous amount of waterborne diseases. You drink the water and you get sick. Now, you even bathe in the water and you get sick. I can attest to this because I lived in Equatorial Guinea. It's an enormous problem, and millions of people suffer illness, and hundreds of thousands of people die every year from waterborne illnesses. In response, Vestigard made Life Straw. Life Straw is a plastic straw but uses medical textiles to filter out bacteria that could be harmful for people. Here's an example of what Life Straw does. Life Straw can take absolutely putrid water, can not only filter out the dirts and heavy metals, but also is able to filter out all the different bacteria that could come in contact with your body. And thus it provides an enormous service. I am not only a fan of this product, but I have Life Straw in my house in case of emergency. I live in the Candelaria. At times we don't have water. In case of emergency, I have 2 Life Straws for me and my son. Each Life Straw is supposed to last between 30 and 60 days. So if there's a problem, I have a solution. But this kind of takes us back to the concept of segment, target, position, and differentiation. Because what Vestigard has been able to do is they've been not only to target their local market, but they've found segments where they can target in international markets. Particularly, they focus on large community groups. The first Life Straw was for individuals. The second, which is on the right, is for families. And only recently they've come up with community Life Straw filters. So now they're targeting not only individuals, but families and communities. While needy people in Africa have been a consistent target user for the product, the actual target market for the product are aid organizations, notably the United Nations Foundation and the Carter Center being a charity run by the former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. These organizations work to reduce the amount of waterborne illnesses in Africa. But it is also featured as a product on Survivor Man, which is a survival series produced in Canada. The product was so useful and provided so much value that other people who were not the initial target market became interested in the Life Straw product. I'm one of those people. After originally reading about Life Straw, I started to buy Life Straw because I live in the Candelaria and occasionally we don't have fresh water. But another group became enamored with the product, and that was backpackers. In response, Vestigard made new Life Straws designed particularly for backpackers. These are 2-stage filters that not only reduce chlorine, but also filter out bacteria. And they have a pour spout as well as a straw, so it could be used for cooking or it could be used for individuals. The case of Vestigard Life Straw highlights the importance of applying basic marketing theory to international markets. Vestigard was able to find international markets in developing countries where international organizations could buy LifeStraw and send it to people in need. But they were also able to find other markets in different parts of the world where backpackers, military people, and people like me in the Candelaria also could use the same product. In this way, they created multiple targets, gave a different position to each product, and then was able to differentiate their product from existing competition. In relationship to LifeStraw, I will post one of these questions in the essay portion of the lesson. This ends the second lecture. I thank you for your attention, and I hope this was a benefit and provided clarity in relationship to the chapter. Work clothes for women.